Welcome to the Committee of the Whole agenda of the Sunshine Coast Regional District for March 23rd, 2023. I'd like to call this meeting to order and acknowledge that the Sunshine Coast Regional District is within the territories of the Shishal and the Squamish Nations. First, we need to adopt the agenda. Moved by Councillor. I don't have to say that out at this. I've chaired 2 council meetings in the last 2 days, and I may get things mixed up. So I did see a mover and a seconder. All those in favor? The motion carries. And we have a delegation from BC Timber Sales. Pierre Aubin is here. Oh yeah, you are in the front right now, yeah. And I think the presentation will primarily, but I'll be done by Lars, but I'll leave it to Pierre to do the introductions.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for taking the time for us present here today. My name is Pierre Aubin. I'm the practice forester for the BC Timber Sales Sunshine Coast Field Team. With me today is Polar Geoscience. I'll let them kind of introduce themselves here.
Yeah, my name is Lars Unilla, and I'm a consulting hydrologist out of Squamish. And my colleague Robbie Johnson will be presenting an overview of our work today. You want to talk to?
And I'm Tom Johnson. I'm the Woodlands Manager for BCTS Chinook. That's the operating business area that we call ourselves. So I'm based out of Chilliwack and look after operations in Chilliwack, Squamish, Sunshine Coast, and Haida Gwaii. And as BC Timber Sales, our objective provincially is to deliver 20% of the AAC for the province to support the market pricing system to set the rate for stumpage for major licensees.
Great, and I will just remind, before we start, I'll remind everybody that we usually have a restrictive 10-minute delegation period, but we've generously expanded this one to 30 for overall. So that includes questions and speeches.
Yeah. Yeah. So to kind of get things going here then, just a brief background before I hand it off to Polar. This is a report on phase 1 and 2 of a 3-phase watershed assessment that PCTS began in July of 2022. Phase 1 was kind of a review of the background data for the area, as well as kind of using new remote sensing to generate more detailed watersheds. Phase 2 was more a ground-based review of licenses and confirming kind of risks and hazard within the watersheds and generating this report. And then phase 3 will be kind of a site-level assessment of planned BCTS developments, and that's going to be coming later on. Today we're just looking to present the report because it is quite lengthy in a more digestible fashion, and also to capture additional comments and considerations to include, as this report is still in draft form, and we're looking for additional comments that we can add in. And with that, I'll hand it over to Robbie.
Thank you, Pierre, and thanks to everyone for the opportunity to present today. So this is our presentation on the Mount Elphinstone South Watershed Assessment. And I should preface this by saying that this is a lengthy document, and this has really been condensed into this 20-minute presentation. So it's very kind of high-level overview. If you're interested in more details, please refer to the report. So we've kind of broken it down into 4 main sections. I'll start by going over some background material. What is a watershed assessment, our sort of assessment framework, the methods, then go into the watershed condition, sensitivity, and then discuss the risks and risk mitigation, and then finally some take-home messages. So what is a watershed assessment? So it's a specialist, in this case a hydrologist, so of myself and Lars, review of a watershed and its streams with a focus on hydrologic. So this could be flooding or low flows, and geomorphic, so things such as landslides. So these processes that could pose a hazard or compromise water supply and quality. Downstream values potentially at risk are identified. This could be, fish habitat, bridges, and the potential hydrologic and geomorphic hazards and risks with forest development are analyzed, and guidance to reduce, mitigate, or avoid risks with forest development or risk control measures are provided to forest managers, such as BCTS. So yeah, as Pierre said, this report is currently in draft form, and we're welcoming comment. Given the values present and complexity of this urban interface area, the Mount Elphinstone South Watershed Assessment was conducted at a level of intensity and rigor above most assessments performed in BC. So for this assessment, we identified 8 main watersheds, and sort of collectively we're calling that our assessment area. So this included Chester Creek, End or Walker Creek, Smales Creek, Higgs Brook, Slater Creek, Molyneux Creek, Joe Smith Creek, and Clough Creek. Yeah, so our assessment objectives were to determine the likelihood of specific hazards occurring. And so when I say specific hazards, we're referring to those things like floods, low flows, channel stability. And we're looking at 2 sort of scenarios. So the current or pre-development conditions. So that includes, what's happened with past disturbances, that's the current state. And then we're looking at future post-development conditions. And so we conducted what's called a partial risk analysis. And so in this analysis, we identify the type of hazard, so again, floods, landslides, and then the likelihood of that hazard affecting a value downstream. So we don't look at the vulnerability or robustness of the downstream value, so it's a very high level assessment. We're only concerned with, say we're looking at the hazard being a flood and the value being a bridge. We're only concerned with that value, the bridge being present. So we assume it's present, and we're assessing the risk of flooding to that bridge. So yeah, this was sort of a combination of both an office review and a field review. During the office review, we looked at previous assessments, reviewed a history of the area, and then we compiled and analyzed sort of a whole suite of data and developed a high resolution base map of the area. And the field review consisted of about 3 weeks, a review over 2021, 2022. And so this map just sort of shows our field review locations. The pink dots show what was reviewed in 2020, and the yellow dots show in 2021. And yeah, as you can see, we tried to cover as many areas as possible, see the streams, see the crossings, and as many locations as we could. Given there is quite a bit of private property, so that was definitely a limiting factor. And then finally, we modeled what's called hydrologic recovery of the forest within the assessment area. So when I'm saying hydrologic recovery, this is often relating to flooding. And say after a forest disturbance, or once our forest is disturbed, we're looking at how the influence of the forest has changed, changes how precipitation eventually ends up as runoff. So immediately following a disturbance, we no longer have those trees that are drawing moisture from the soil, releasing it to the atmosphere. So generally, you lose trees, you're going to have more moisture reaching the streams. And then as those trees grow back, they'll slowly start to sort of approach old growth conditions in terms of how they influence precipitation reaching the streams. We identified hazard types and identified downstream values of concern, analyzed partial risk, and then identified risk management options. Yeah, so here is sort of a satellite image of the assessment area. We can see those 8 watersheds we're looking at. And these watersheds are generally sort of small catchments or watersheds. They have a high density of parallel drainages. So you can sort of see in the middle of that image there, we have this kind of series of gullies, and there's lots of smaller tributaries to the main streams. And there's very few lakes and wetlands within the area. So that means that we don't really have a whole lot of storage, not a whole lot of buffering capacity. So as a result of that, we also have shallow soils in kind of the mid and upper sections, and then deeper soils along that lower bench, which we call the Gibson's bench. So yeah, these streams respond relatively rapidly to precipitation events. And so the stream flow we see is largely mirror those, precipitation, usually in the form of rain. But we do get occasional snow. And yeah, despite relatively little snow, it's these rain on snow events that can generate some of the largest floods. So these are sort of the events that we should be concerned most with. So in terms of climate change, we looked at future climate projections with increased temperatures. There's increased drought potential in the summer, increased flood potential in the winter. That's with projected increases in winter precipitation, including these atmospheric river or Pineapple Express precipitation events. And so the risk management options that we put forth to BCTS consider this climate change context. So looking at past forest disturbances, the assessment area has been, it is mainly the second growth forest stands, and that's a result of past logging and wildfires. So in that purple oval there, this is an image from, or an aerial photo from 1947. So we can see there is, quite an extensive history of logging. So we have kind of Gibson's in the lower right of the photo, and that's the Roberts Creek Forest Service Road in the upper left. And then kind of fast forwarding to 2003, we can see that, that area that was a cut block is now recovered. And so that kind of goes into that hydrologic recovery piece that I was talking about earlier. So the area below BCTS operating area, which if you can see that sort of purple dashed line, that's BCTS operating area. So everything below that has been subject to widespread residential and commercial development. And so those areas that were forested, are no longer forested, and those forests won't, largely won't recover. So we don't expect to see a whole lot of hydrologic recovery there. The forest won't regenerate. So the watershed values that we identified include human safety, fish and fish habitat, private property, stream crossings, surface water intakes, and groundwater wells. And the hazards we identified include peak flows, summer low flows, aquifer recharge, sediment yield, channel instability, and pollutants. Peak flow hazard, so this refers to the likelihood that flooding along a particular stream or stream reach has or will become measurably more severe or frequent relative to mature or old growth, which is our baseline forest conditions. And so this is generally evaluated based on the level of forest disturbance throughout the watersheds. So this is a bit of a generalization, but this figure on the right basically just shows sort of the level of forest disturbance. So those areas in red are kind of heavily disturbed or higher disturbance, and then as you get into the sort of from lighter to darker greens is more hydrologically recovered or less disturbed. And so in general, as the level of forest cover disturbance increases, the amount of water lost to the atmosphere decreases. So we sort of have this relationship where you have, if you have more forest cover disturbance, you're gonna have more precipitation reaching the streams, and a higher potential for flooding to occur. So this area outlined in black, that is BCTS operating area within our assessment area. And so you can see that, there are a few red patches, which are sort of those newer cut blocks, but to a large extent, things are in a state of recovery. And then below that, we have the residential and commercial areas which have been disturbed and won't recover. So we identified 30 points of interest throughout the assessment area. And at each of these points, we looked at the level of disturbance above that point, and we used that to determine the peak flow hazard at that point. And so these points include the mouths of the streams. It could be the confluence of major tributaries or points along BCTS operating area boundary. And so the peak flow hazard, green is low hazard, yellow is moderate, red is high hazard, generally increases moving downstream due to this increasing residential and commercial development influence. So you can see along BCTS operating area, we generally have low peak flow hazard, and then as we move downstream, that increases from moderate and in some cases high. So in terms of summer low flows, this was evaluated based on the distribution of forest stand ages throughout the watersheds. And this is sort of a new approach that hasn't really been applied in previous watershed assessments. This was done in collaboration with the provincial research hydrologist, Dr. Bill Floyd, based out of Nanaimo. And so the guiding principles here were that young trees generally consume more water than old trees, riparian areas consume more water than upland areas, and deciduous trees consume more water than coniferous trees. And so we classified the stand ages into 4 categories. And so those areas shown in red and orange, those are the ages where we expect to see higher water consumption, particularly those areas in red. So those 11 to 40-year-old trees are going to consume quite a bit more water than mature trees. Whereas the areas in blue, which are recently harvested, those trees aren't drawing moisture from the ground, so we actually expect to see more precipitation reaching the streams. And so based on that age distribution in each watershed, we came up with a summer low flow hazard, which is the likelihood that the current forest structure is adversely affecting low flows. And so as you can see, in about half the watersheds, there's a moderate hazard. 3 of them, there's a low hazard, and in one watershed, Slater Creek, there's a high hazard. In terms of groundwater recharge, in the fall and winter, localized increase in water table is possible following harvest, and this may contribute to increased recharge. In the summertime, the type, age, and density of riparian vegetation has a large effect on runoff patterns. And so given the long travel times, which is typically greater than 10 years, kind of up to 80 years for groundwater, forest harvest effects on the aquifers are expected to be undetectable. A big caveat here is that this assumes the implementation of the risk control measures, which I'll speak to later, for peak and low flows. In terms of sediment yield, in a forestry context, so typically we have sort of 2 main components. So landslides are often responsible for generating sort of coarser and fine sediment, whereas roads are typically one of the main contributors of fine sediment. So the roads and crossings within BCTS operating area generally pose a low risk. These roads were generally in good condition. Stream crossings were generally functional, although there is always some residual risk associated with roads and crossings. And evidence of, so in the bottom image there, this is another air photo from 1990. So we did see evidence of past landslides, and we did look at air photos going back to 1947. And this is an example in Clough Creek of a landslide that initiated a debris flow in 1983. So there was some activity during that period, but we haven't seen any recent landslides since then. And for stream channel stability, the riparian vegetation, which is sort of just the vegetation that's along streams, was largely functional in providing bank stability, so through tree roots and things like that, and also shade, but is occasionally lacking in future recruitment of large woody debris. So what we mean by large wood is, you can see in that upper right photo that there is some old wood in there, some of it may be rotting, and that wood's really important in providing structure to those streams and retaining sediment And yeah, since these forests are mainly second growth, we don't expect to see sort of newer large wood being recruited into those streams. So although there's currently wood in there, which is a good thing, we may not see that kind of in the short term in the future. And there was evidence of sediment transport and scour were noted in most streams. So, in the bottom right, we can see, there's a lot of sediment moving through these systems, although the channel shape and the pattern is not changing. So they're relatively stable, despite being sort of active. So, into some take-home messages. Given the values and complexity of urban interface areas, the Mount Elphinstone South Watershed Assessment was conducted at a level of intensity and rigor above most assessments performed in BC. All stream catchments have been subject to a history of wildfire and logging. Historical records indicate widespread forest disturbance occurred since at least the 1900s. Lower portions of the assessment area has supported expanding residential and commercial development. And as such, the peak flow hazard is low in BCTS operating area and ranges from low to high below BCTS operating area. Given the distribution of forest ages, we suggest summer low flows have been affected to varying degrees by past forest disturbance. And so if the peak flow and low flow management recommendations are met, groundwater recharge is not expected to measurably be affected by future forest development. Roads are generally in good, stable condition. Despite a couple recent major atmospheric river events, no recent landslides were noted. This is possibly a reflection of the post-forest practice code improvements and managing terrain stability and hazards. And as such, the current sediment hazard is low. These streams have experienced past flooding and sediment transport, although are generally stable. And as Pierre mentioned, the next phase of this assessment will involve a review of block plans to see how they align with the recommendations put forth, which I'll discuss next. So we recommend the approach of maintaining, wherever possible, a low hazard within BCTS operating area. So that's the area within BCTS control, and avoiding an increase to existing hazard levels downstream of the operating area. So that's the area that's outside of BCTS control. So to maintain a low peak flow hazard, we recommend equivalent clear-cut area, which is a metric we use, which shows sort of the level of disturbance or hydrologic recovery. We recommend that remain below 20%, which is typically a level sort of below which the effect of harvesting can't be detected. That's sort of a general consensus in the forest hydrology literature. And we recommend that BCTS share this information with MOTI, Sunshine Coast Regional District, Town of Gibsons, and that the appropriate party consider a stream crossing review to preemptively identify and replace undersized or potentially non-functional crossings. And to reduce the potential adverse effects of harvesting on summer low flows, we recommend prioritizing high retention around small streams. So that's to promote shade, prevent kind of colonization of deciduous species which use more water, and then maintaining opening sizes to less than 8 hectares or implementing partial harvest, so thinning what we call, these are silviculture systems. And again, that's to sort of reduce increases in energy and promote shade. And we recommend that terrain stability assessments guide forest development planning where harvesting or road construction is planned on slope gradients exceeding 50%. And we've also presented a number of recommendations to reduce potential forest development effects on sediment yield, which include recommending that works involving potential soil disturbance or large cuts and fills within 50 meters of a stream and installation of bridges or major culverts be monitored by a qualified professional. Thank you very much.
Great. And I see Director Bax first with a question.
I have a question about the equivalency cut areas. You said that 20% is pretty much the base, is about as much as you should cut before you start getting into risk factor. Now, do you calculate that according to each watershed? And does it include the urban areas as part of the 20%.
Yes, so, yeah, obviously we can't show everything in this slide, or in this presentation, but, so, when we're calculating that ECA, or equivalent clear-cut area, we've identified 30 points throughout those 8 watersheds. So, that includes at the mouth of the streams, which would include that residential area. And so a lot of those watersheds, they might have as much as 40% of that area has been, subject to that residential or commercial development. So that's sort of you might have 40% ECA is your baseline, which you're never going to get below. And so at those locations, we might have a moderate or high hazard, and that level of hazard is not, won't be reduced to a low. So in our recommendations, we say that the low hazard within BCTS operating area, which is the area they can control, should be maintained at low, but below 20%, and that will serve to prevent any increase in hazard downstream.
But isn't the fact that if it's already
Director
over that,
Bax, I've got Director McMahon next.
it's a follow-up question.
Yeah, but I've got to,
All right.
we've got to follow some procedure here. But Director McMahon.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair. I do have quite a bit to say because I will point out that E stands for Elphinstone and that Chester Creek, which is by far the largest creek in this report, is the heart of Elphinstone. So thank you very much for coming today. This is a very valuable report with outstanding mapping and other data, and I'm sure we will be referring to it in years to come. I'm quite familiar with the slopes of Mount Elphinstone because I hike up there all the time, but this report really sharpened my awareness of the complexity and fragility of the creek sheds on our mountain. I have some quibbles about the content of the report, most of which have already been raised by local residents. Some significant drainage from the town into Chester Creek is missing from the maps. The well data is wrong, and this is no fault of the consultants, because the province's online well data is wildly inaccurate and outdated. The photo in the slide deck of the well and the resident, that well was drilled and registered in 2017, and it's not on the maps. And the condition of the lower 2 kilometers of Chester Creek, I think, is considerably worse than the consultants reported. Stream keepers have been documenting landslides in the ravine as recent as 2 weeks ago. I'd like to point out that BC Timber Sales is not the villain of this story. Many organizations, both public and private, have contributed to the deteriorated condition of our watersheds. BCTS is one of the few that's required to do public consultation. For example, I have never seen the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure in a public meeting defending their decisions about subdivision approval, road development, creek diversion, or deteriorating culverts. When it comes to Mount Elphinstone, BCTS is a relative latecomer to the out-of-control party that's trashing the house. However, that's not an excuse for making a bad situation worse. Peak flows in Chester Creek are already far above historical levels. The hazard is identified as high, and damage is being caused. We can see it. So why would we even consider adding more runoff to the creek? And my concern from this table is who ends up holding the bag if things go bad? Many parties are authorized to make land use decisions that affect our watershed, and not one of them is responsible for the consequences. Who paid for the washout of Lower Road? Taxpayers and the individual homeowners whose property was damaged. If BC Timber Sales gets the risk assessment wrong, will they be on the hook to fix the resulting damages? No, we will. My other big concern here is that environmental conditions are changing very, very rapidly. We need to apply the lessons we've been learning the hard way in the Chapman Creek watershed to the situation on Mount Elphinstone. Repeated droughts have affected the soil and the recharge of groundwater. Last fall, SCRD staff reported significant changes in the behavior of the Chapman Creek hydrology, unlike anything we've seen before. These droughts are also stressing the forests, increasing our fire risk, and making weakened trees vulnerable to extensive blowdowns, such as those that occurred around Soames and Hopkins during the windstorm last November. BC Timber Sales' tenure on Mount Elphinstone is a key area for the recharge of the aquifers that provide an increasing portion of the drinking water supply to our community. That area should be protected as a community watershed, and it's the province that has the power to make that happen, as well as to make sweeping changes to forestry policies that have been needed for a long time. But we all have parts to play. The report recommends on page 138 that we should have a watershed management strategy that brings all the players to the table, including First Nations, provincial ministries, federal fisheries, local governments, and private property owners. And that is certainly needed. And we also need to look at all the tools in our regional district toolkit that can be used not only to halt new damage to our creek sheds, but to start actively restoring the developed areas of our watershed. Thank you.
Thank you, Director McMahon. I don't know if there are any questions you want to, I think a lot of them were, yeah. I've got Director Stanford next. Okay, Director Bax.
All right, I've got a few things to discuss about a particular cut block that falls fully within the phase 3 of the study. Now, I'm particularly concerned about the, because it's in my area, cut blocks TA 0521. They fall directly within the stream beds that you've discussed that aren't Chaster. You also, there's a review going on right now of the timber supply. Is that so? There's a timber supply review going on? Yes, and that's going to affect your 5-year plans?
Depending on the outcome.
Yes?
It's not led by BCTS, it's led by the Sunshine Coast Natural Resource District and
All right.
Vancouver region.
And so, and this is so this will directly affect how you
Director Bax, could I ask that you speak
Sorry.
through the chair so that we can have a little bit of control over the meeting?
Sorry. Anyway, the cut blocks that I'm discussing are within the watershed of the other creeks that aren't included in this study. And because of the fact that there's a timber review going on and phase 3 hasn't been completed, I'd look forward to them. These cut blocks are set to go on sale in July. And I think that putting them up for sale when there's still so many questions about what's going on in that area is just irresponsible. I'd like to see that they defer the sale of these cut blocks until their 2024 season. There's just too many questions, and it's too important to my community. The watershed is threatened by this activity. This is not a hydrogeological study, which is a study of groundwater. This is a hydrological study, which is a surface water. And there's a number of well users that are within the area that I'm discussing, that the quality of their well water could be threatened by this activity. And if they end up without safe drinking water, then it's going to fall upon the SCRD to supply them with drinking water. And that's going to be on all the taxpayers of the regional district in order to bring water to people who've lost access to their safe drinking water. So I would recommend that BC Timber Sales defer the sale of cut block TA 0521 to the 2024 season to allow time for phase 3 to be completed.
And they've heard you. Director Stanford, do you still want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I just quickly wanted to point out this report. Thank you. It is incredibly informative, and what I'm pulling out of this, given that it doesn't specifically impact Area F, is the opportunity to see this type of report provided for other parts of the Sunshine Coast, including the northeast, West House Sound cut areas, as well as further up the coast towards Sechelt. It just helps us inform our constituents about what is going on and the complexities of what we're looking at. One of the things I didn't find enough of in the report was impacts on potential forest fires. There was some reference to it, but I'd like to see more detail on that, because I think that is going to be one of our big focuses in the coming year. Thank you.
So I guess I'll look to Tom. Yeah, I'm
So
curious about that too. Is this a new standard that we can expect for coastwide?
For BCTS, this is a standard that we're going to employ in our Sunshine Coast, well, lower Sunshine Coast operations, where we have, so we've also done some work in Roberts Creek, right? And that's the next, we will be, once we get through this report and go through the public engagement on this report and fine tune the formatting and what the public's looking for in the report, we've collected a bunch of data for a second report for that section. And there will be another phase 1 and 2 report for Roberts Creek as well.
Thanks. Director McMahon?
Yeah, I have a couple of quick questions. One is, could we get a copy of the slide deck, the long slide deck that you did yesterday? I would like to know if the SCRD can use the mapping data that you got from this study to update our online map, which is wrong for a lot of the creek locations. And the third question I have is around creek names. What would you recommend going forward so that we can all agree on the names of the creeks?
Sure.
Yeah, so I think Timber Sales agreed yesterday that we would share some of the slide deck that we have regarding the mapping information. I think some of that has already been shared, but we're open to, I mean, once we compile the data, it's in BC Timber Sales' hands, so by all means communicate with them. It's out of our hands in terms of that. And the naming, that, I mean, we know the gazetted names or these legal names of certain streams, but there's countless streams out there that don't have names. And so we just have to give it arbitrary identifiers in our report, which are kind of cumbersome. So I'm all ears if there is a local name to a stream that people refer to. So we'd love to put that on our maps, but yeah, it's a challenge.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I think it's a great report. I did read the whole thing. I wouldn't mind if the end was at the beginning, though, because the summary was at the end. But I do have a question. You mentioned partial harvesting, and to me that means selective logging. Is that a new standard we're considering now, or did I mistake what you said? What was said? Sorry.
No, it is something that we're considering as we try to manage the ECAs in these small watersheds, and probably will in some of the phase 3 analysis see 1 or 2 blocks that are partial harvest.
Excellent. Thank you.
Director Bax.
Yeah, as far as partial harvesting goes, I wonder how that is monitored. But another concern of mine is within these blocks, there's the blocks that I'm talking about are in 4 pieces, and one of the pieces has a panhandle. The center piece has a panhandle that I've been looking at some of the maps that are within the SCRD jurisdiction, and it seems that this particular block actually overlaps something that's within SCRD jurisdiction. But besides that, there is the British Columbia Technical Advisory Panel has put together a study to create old growth recruitment. So of forests that are of a certain age that if we put them aside, they would become old growth if we just didn't cut them. And these blocks fall, I'm going to say, between 60 to 80% within that area. So again, I urge BC Timber Sales to defer the sales of these blocks.
Thank you. Seeing no more questions from directors. Want to confirm that? Oh, I see Director Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to make two observations. I agree with Director Stamford. We need to be so aware of forest fires and how we can use logging to, in fact, create some safety around the impacts of forest fires. And the other thing I noticed on one of the slides, you chose to make a point that you'd bolded a section about the importance of using qualified professionals. And I commend you for that, because I think it's important that we do rely on the experts, and in this case, thanks for doing that.
Thank you, Director Henderson. And I would like to thank the delegation, the BC Timber Sales team, for coming to the Sunshine Coast and making a few presentations, at least, that I'm aware of over the last 2 days. I think this is your last one, so yeah. Well, congratulations on finishing, too. So, yeah, thanks very much again for this informative report.
Thank you very much.
Perfect.
So we're ready for a break yet, but I'll just leave a little bit of space here to transition to our next item. Or grab a cup of coffee for a minute. Next, we have the most straightforward item on this agenda, which is an item for information, and which is a grant status update. And I will just ask for a motion to receive all reports and items on the agenda. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? That motion carries. And I think we have a manager online. I think the report itself is pretty straightforward. I'll just look to directors to see if there are any questions, and Manager Taylor, you're certainly welcome to speak up and add any additions or highlights if you want to.
Thank you, Chair. So I just wanted to say this is a biannual report that was last provided at the September 22nd Committee of the Whole meeting. The purpose of this report is to provide an update on recent grant notifications, as well as the status of grants that are currently in progress, and provide information on potential opportunities that fit within the current work plan. After writing this report, staff received notification that the SRD will be receiving just over $2.2 million in one-time funding from the Grant Growing Communities Fund by the end of March. Staff are reviewing information that was released yesterday surrounding eligibility criteria of these funds. Staff will report to a future committee as to the potential use of these funds. And we'll take any questions if there are any.
Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm just looking at the pending applications on page 278, and we have a number of fairly high dollar valued grants that we're waiting on word for. And I'm just wondering if staff have any indication on when announcements might be made on specifically the Langdale water treatment upgrade, universal metering phase 3, and the wildfire preparedness and prevention grants. Thank you.
Thanks. We'll look to the manager for the answer to that question. There may be 3 different answers. Or our senior staff. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I'd say we don't really have an indication on when we'll know on some of these. Expect some announcements will be forthcoming in the near future. Typically, they happen around, with the provincial budget recently being presented. We tend to see announcements come out shortly after that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Director Gabias.
Thank you, Chair. I'm wondering how this compares to previous years. How are we doing when it comes to grants?
Staff.
Thank you. I would say the number of grants we're applying for has increased in the past. I'd say approvals are probably consistent with prior years. Everything's assessed on a merit basis and scored appropriately. So I'd say it's consistent with past years, yes.
Director McMahon.
Yes, the Growing Communities Fund, that if we were to apply any of those funds to shared services that are shared with the municipalities, then there would be a question of cost splitting. And I'm guessing that would be outside of the scope of the report, or would it? Or have we policy in this area?
Policy, I'm not sure. Yeah. I'll look to staff again.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. The question certainly has come up before, and I think it's something that would be assessed on a case-by-case basis. So what staff would look to do in the report that's going to follow is identify some potential projects that could be used or that the funding could be applied for the board to consider. And if the board had a desire to explore cost-sharing opportunities with municipalities, that would be something that would be at the discretion of the board to pursue.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that some of our biggest ticket items are shared services, water and solid waste being 2 of them. Thank you.
Director Stamford.
Thank you, Chair. On page 280 of the package, there's an investigation into granting opportunities for investment readiness program. I'm just not sure what that is. The description is quite vague, so I'm wondering if I could get an example.
Thank you for the question. That program, I believe, is related to the budget proposal for the Hillside Development Park business planning, and that's through the ICE-T, the Islands Coastal Economic Trust organization.
Director Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions, if I may. The first relates to the COVID restart. I'm wondering if there's reference to it being allocated in 2021, I think in 2022. Is it fully allocated? Are these funds fully committed to projects?
I'll look to the staff.
Thank you. I am not 100% certain of that. I believe they are mostly allocated. We are required to report on the use and allocation of those funds as part of our annual report. That is a schedule to our financial statements, so that will be forthcoming in April. We'll provide the board an opportunity to review at that time.
Okay, and then moving to 280, there's a reference to the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund. I'm not sure if the board is aware, this is I believe a $1 billion fund for major projects, and the closing is June of this year. The projects need to be completed by 2032, so it's the potential for big projects like reservoirs and huge infrastructure. I'm wondering what we've been doing for this project, for this fund, to get into the line of applicants, I'm sure.
Do we have something in the works there? Do we know, I mean, maybe other managers, directors who know more about that. But I will look over to our staff table, our CAO. There you go, CAO.
I'd have to look into it. I'm not aware of a specific project that's been identified for this specific program at this time. There may be.
We'll work on finding the answer to that.
Closing is, I believe, June 15th or 16th, so time moves on.
Okay, thank you for this report. It's been received. And thank you, directors, for your questions. The next item on the agenda is under communications, Director Henderson's letter regarding Water Now solution. We've received some background information. I've heard some. I'm usually the person who complains about really long agendas, but so ironically, I have to admit I'm the one who requested that these reports actually be on the agenda, because there's been a lot of references to them in past discussions, and it really helps that we actually have them in front of us if directors are going to be referring to them, and they were referred to in Director Henderson's letter as well. So I'll look to Director Henderson to introduce this item.
Okay. Thank you, Chair. So folks, why am I raising this again? Well, 2 months ago I was here and I was worried then. I'm even more worried now. We haven't seen much rain really recently. And I guess I'm looking for other suggestions. I put some ideas out. I think they're workable. I think they're important for us to deliver on them now, because it is about a temporary solution. You know, we've got lots of possibilities. We've talked about some of them for, I met with a couple of folks maybe 3 weeks ago, and they showed me drawings that one person had done for Clahome Lake 20 years ago. You know, so the long-term solutions are there, but we need water now. We need it for this summer, and I believe we need it for at least 2 more summers before we have any sort of longer-term solution. So, you know, what I want to do is re-emphasize some of what I said in my letter, and then I'm looking to each of you. I'd like to know, what have I missed, or what other ideas do you have that we can charge staff with to provide confirmation of what we should do? Because for me, this is a dire situation. And I don't get why, in response to these letters, none of you have replied or responded with anything new. We don't have the time to waste. We don't have the time to wait. And to me, stage 3 and stage 4 restrictions are not acceptable. The risks of doing nothing far outweigh the little manageable risks of doing a few things that I've identified. The other thing we've come to realize, certainly around the district seashell table, and I think here, is the longer we wait, more things cost. So let's get on with it and get some things done. I think that's what the public wants to hear, or wants to see, and certainly I do. So in the absence of anything better, and I'd welcome better solutions, but we need to pursue the following options. We need to proceed with the Dusty Road well. It's the infrastructure for use on a temporary basis. Using it is safe, it's temporary, it's prudent, and it's cheap. Secondly, we need to pursue with the province the reduction of the environmental flow needs. This is in Chapman Creek. This is if we could get the province to agree, that's a huge win for us, and I hope you'll join me in Victoria to pursue that. And then the other thing that I hope, and I'm pleased that Director Paul is on the call, I think we can really supplement the EFNs with perhaps non-potable water from the various wells on the mine site, and potentially from the Sea Saltwater Resource Center. So folks, it's our job to make some tough decisions. I know we can manage the risks. I know we can avoid the very real potential costs of doing nothing. And like I said, it's affordable. So I encourage, and certainly, as you can tell, I'm invested in these solutions, but I hope you're willing to do so. If not, I suggest now's the time for you to provide your suggestions to avoid what is a catastrophe looming if we do nothing. So, Chair, thank you. I won't, in spite of 250 pages of agenda, I won't speak to the length of your agenda, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Director Henderson. Sorry? I could speak to it too. You know, I'm going to go first and just say, yeah, I mean, as Gibson's doesn't have a vote in regional water, where we are really concerned about the regional water situation, though, obviously, and as always, willing to cooperate. And I even spoke to the CAO yesterday about, the CAO about, you know, what are our plans for this summer? Should we need to supplement the Chapman system again? And I know he's been in touch with Mark Brown about that as our interim director already. So I know the whole community is concerned in Gibson's as well. And I'd just like to, I think the last discussion we had on this, there was a lot of references to these reports. The report from 2019 in particular about that initially looked at Dusty Road. When I read that report then and heard discussion about that report then, and really when I look at it now too, it really seems to be, to me, in the context of looking at Dusty Road as a long-term permanent solution, and the professionals at the time expressing serious concerns about that as a long-term permanent solution because of plans for mining in the area. I don't think that conflicts with the opportunity to look at it in the shorter term. So I think the proposal by Director Henderson to look at it in the shorter term is completely legitimate and worth looking at. And I think we would need more professional information to do that. My biggest concern is the time that this all takes. And I hear Director Henderson speak to the need to expedite this. I think with some of the provincial approvals, we're definitely on the radar at the province, and I would hope that they'd look at expediting some of that, but I am concerned about the length of time that these reports still take, and all the hoops that would need to be jumped through prior. So, but I don't have a lot of solid information on how long that would take. I'm looking at how long Church Road has taken, looking at Langdale. I'm curious about Langdale. I hope that's something we can find out in this discussion where that's at as a possible getting that online quickly, what the possibilities of that are, and that's just what I wanted to say to reframe this discussion a bit. I do think this is a reasonable option to look at, that and that there is, to me, there's no conflict between looking at Dusty Road as a shorter-term solution, as Director Henderson is raising, and the legitimate concerns that have been brought up by previous reports saying that it's not a recommended solution in the long term. And I'll look to Director Bax. Oh, no? Okay, okay, you had your hand up in person first, but Director Stamford is first online here.
Thank you, Chair. I am glad we're talking about water again. This is the time to do it. I also really appreciate, Chair, that the additional reports were added in, and the way they were added in really frames for me the conversation. And I have to say that it just emphasized my desire not to go in the direction of Dusty Road, in that the experts that authored these reports were very clear that this is not a tenable situation to go in. I understand we're looking at a temporary situation, but I also would not be able to sleep if I knew that water was good this week and possibly not good the next week, and that where we would stand if it ever came out that water was not safe, which seemed to be the primary concerns of the authors of the reports. Given that, I also think we need to know more about what we're going to do this summer. I am very concerned that I haven't seen a very clear plan of action as to how to get through this summer on the assumption that it will be the same as last summer or the summer before. This is an untenable situation, and I want to see us be able to move forward. I am interested in the other options that Director Henderson suggested, and I think we can move forward with those. And also, yes, what is happening with Langdale? What are the strategies for this summer? So that's where I'm looking, but I'm still not convinced that even temporarily Dusty Road is the answer for us.
And I do want to look to staff right now with that Langdale question. If we have any, if we can just, for the purposes, we've been updated before, but for the purposes of this discussion, where is Langdale? Where is that water source opportunity at? And are there any opportunities to expedite that?
I can start trying to answer that question. Definitely it's top of the list as far as projects as well as Church Road. They're being full resourced by staff consultants to get them online in both cases as quickly as possible. And there'll be reports to the board and the public in the weeks coming up. They're being prepared right now to provide a more detailed update on both of those.
Church Road and Langdale. Yeah. Okay. Director Bax.
Well, I'd like to say that I also appreciate the addition of the report. It really kind of puts things into perspective. It would be really nice to have these experts back in front of us again to ask some pertinent questions. To me, it's still the time and resources to create a temporary well for what length of period of time, still a question, with still the risk of it being damaged by activities upstream is it's risky, and I know that the SCRD is a bit risk averse. The cost would still be probably quite enormous. I'd love to see it happen, but if the threats that would impinge on the future of this well, reading the report, I was really surprised at how much water is actually there. If the if the industrial activities that in the future would threaten the quality of this water could be removed, I'd be more amenable to approving this, but I don't see that happening. It's there's private industry that's involved here, and I don't think they're going to give up their rights to extract the product that they've been given the rights to extract. Should they change their minds, then I might approve it.
Okay, well, you know, I want to intervene as chair for a minute here, because I think that rightfully raises a big question mark here, which I think, you know, we're looking at reports from the past, from 2019, that talk about future industrial activities, the anticipation of future industrial activities. So, and I kind of hear we're kind of flipping back and forth to the assumption that those activities are going on now, or they may still be in the future, or they could happen any month without our control, you know, which would be a concern for sure. I mean, we could go to a lot of work to get a well at Dusty Road going, and it would all go to waste if risky industrial activities were to start 2 months later. Is that something that could happen? Do we have anyone here at this table or online who knows more about, or obviously staff knows more about the mining plans for the area that we can speak about? Not seeing anyone raise their hands, so that's okay. Well, that I just want to interrupt our course of discussion here to ask that question. Yeah, because
I think if there was to be any plans, something would have been presented. This is not something you suddenly start digging a hole. You know, it's years away as far as I've been led to believe.
Sorry? Okay. Director Paul.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of points here, like, because I'm still technically an employee of Lehigh, now known as Heidelberg. As part of our safety program, we asked for reports on water condition and stuff. And so they do yearly at least water sampling. I think it's actually every 6 months. And they are showing leakage from landfill. They are showing common compounds that are coming down the hill from it, including methane gas, which we all know is part of decomposition. A few of the other things like dissolved silicones and stuff, whatever. And with the Dusty Road being an unconfined aquifer, that can change very fast. I said, by no means am I an expert on aquifers or like the flow of water, but I do know that when you start drawing out more water of it, it changes how it recharges. It could add a lot more infiltrates in it in a very short time frame. And the mining from Lehigh does not have to be approved by SCRD. It's a Ministry of Mines thing. So their program goes to their discussions and stuff, whatever. Their environmental assessments go through the Ministry of Mines, not through local government. They are starting to dig in different areas, and every time you do that, you break clay layers, you break sediment layers and stuff that are the normal filtration process for water, for groundwater. One of the other comments I have is that I don't think the nation will support any permanent EFN reductions if they're just reliant on whatever SCRD decides is the need for the moment, because as we all know, there's delays in fish spawning and stuff by how they're coming up the ocean and everything, different times, the warming of the oceans and stuff. So there's no guarantee that we know when the fish are coming up. And sometimes those are only a few days. And if we've reduced the flow too far in those few days, those fish may kill the stream. So I don't think we can support that. The other question I have is for these reports that were provided are great. And I see that Grey Creek was supposed to be investigated. I just wanted to ask if it has been. There's a phase 3 suggestion for that. So I just wanted to know about that. Thanks.
Thank you, Director Paul. And there was a question at the end there about Grey Creek. I'll look to staff.
Yes, it is being looked at. We, again, will be providing that further update. There is some issues with it, with you know, turbidity, et cetera. So it's going to have to be looked at in more detail, providing it's been used as a temporary source, and providing it for a permanent source is something we have to look at.
Thank you. Director Lee.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to precede my comments by saying I'm not in favor of proceeding with Dusty Road in any manner, but that's my personal opinion. I'm going to talk about it, though. First of all, we've been having a water summit, and there's been ample opportunity for discussion on this project at the intergovernmental water summits, but none of our directors have taken that opportunity. But it is the correct forum with the relevant partners and decision makers in the room together, and I believe we are going to talk about it in the upcoming meetings, including short and long term. They'll be discussed. I'd like to talk about the letter. I think it'd been more appropriate if a more formal plan had been presented instead of another letter. I would have expected a report from the experts and advisors mentioned, including a plan for advocacy to organizations responsible for the permits and licensing, preliminary timeline for procurement, design, construction, and costs. The experts and advisors mentioned in the letter must have already considered this prior to making their recommendations, and I would have thought they'd been eager to share it with us, but it hasn't been forthcoming, which much to my disappointment. And I want to talk about costs. Just to be clear, it's not an ask for $50,000 and we're going to get water. Should the project move past the feasibility study, we're in for it for a few $1 million for a short-term solution. Doesn't actually, and I also understand that this Dusty Road would compete and negate Grey Creek because of the downhill pipes. But I believe that's for staff to answer. That's a rumor, I don't know. So hopefully staff will answer that for us later on in this discussion. But there's 4 points I think should be commented on. It's the safety and quality of the water at Dusty Road. And I think that's our concern, director's concern. There's the timing to bring it online, the environmental flow needs, and plans for summer water. And I think staff should be talking about that, and hopefully they will answer when I'm finished here. I'll ask them if they can. And so I want to comment on safety and quality of the water at Dusty Road. Dusty Road's an unconfined aquifer, no cap on it. It's very clear. And under one of the recommendations, it talks about the fact lack of unconfined aquifer is important given the location, scale, and potential risk of contamination posed by the industry, including the quarry, and oil spills, leaks from trucks, leaks from machinery. It's an immediate thing if that occurs. But even further than that, it's downslope from a very old and still active landfill and a very active and productive gravel and sand extrication mine. It's, if you go and do your own research on the internet, you'll find people and watersheds and wells that have been contaminated by people putting those facilities in after that surface water was being used. And they are asking for the mines to be shut down, the people with the landfill to take responsibility, mitigate the problem to theirs. And yet, here we are, the owners of a landfill, owners of a mine, and we're talking about building a potable water well in such a dangerous location. I can't imagine we're talking about it, actually. And it's all of our problem, by the way. If it occurs, we are responsible. Us, the people here, are responsible. We know the danger. We're going to say to hell with it and do it. Not me. I couldn't sleep at night. We would be not only morally responsible, we would be criminally responsible. That's a hell of a thing to consider. And our insurance don't protect us from that, by the way. Got some more to say. Let me turn my page here. If you'll bear with me for a minute. Testing. It says, if you test, you'll ensure it's safe. It's not an accurate statement. Testing is done, but it's not as frequent as been portrayed, and it's not as comprehensive as been suggested. They don't occur many times a week or even monthly. Testing could easily miss the contamination of the water and only show up when people get sick. Finally, we really don't know what was buried in that landfill. That landfill was created when people just threw whatever the hell they wanted into the seashell garbage dump. There was no regulations when that started. And testing is very similar to us getting blood work. They're not all inclusive. You have to know what you're testing for and then test for it. And we got a report on January 9th at the Committee of the Whole, and they talked about testing, and I think it might have went past people. What the heck is that? Are we supposed to leave? Oh, probably mine.
And it's on.
Good call. Wow. So, there is regular testing on all water sources and protection wells, along with the distribution system. They're tested weekly for bacteriological throughout all systems, including raw water. Chloroform samples are done throughout the system weekly. Disinfection by products are tested for quarterly, which essentially is looking for how turbidity reacts with chlorine. But water potability is completed only semi-annually. And this is the one that tests for things like metal, aluminum, borium, cadmium, pH, alkalines, sulfates, hardness, volatile organic compounds, benzene. Those are the things we're talking about that are potential hazards. So that's what I would like to say, and that's why I can't support anything to do with the Dusty Road. And so the thing left to talk about is the timing to bring the well online, the environmental flow needs, and most importantly, the plans for summer water. Because I know the staff have plans for summer water. I don't know how far along they are in bringing us up to date on them. So, Chair, would it be appropriate to ask staff to comment?
Well, I think
on
you
this?
had, going back, I think you had a few questions there. I don't remember the first couple.
No questions, they were statements.
Yeah, there were statements for sure. But the summer water, plans for summer water, that's what this is all about, I think. That's what Director Henderson is asking. What are the other plans? So that's a big question for sure.
Yeah, I have 3 questions for staff.
Yeah, I think there were some others as well. So let's
Yeah.
just get.
Do we want to tackle them one at a time, or would you like?
Yeah, let's do it now. These are kind of elephants in the room, some of these
I
questions,
think
so
we
they
need
help all our
to-
discussion.
I think we need to do that myself.
Yeah.
So the one, I got like a 4-page thing.
4 pages of questions now. Well, let's just start with the ones you actually mentioned in your preamble to the questions. Yeah, I mean, you asked.
Yes.
Oh, you asked if there's an overlap of Grey Creek and
I asked
And
first of
Dusty, didn't
all,
you?
if Gray Creek and Dusty Road were online, could we actually use all the water that would be available at that point? I believe the answer is no.
Okay. Yeah, I thought that table in the report said that there was no overlap or conflict between the aquifers in the table, but maybe more information has been,
No, the way I understand our current infrastructure is that when we use Gray Creek, it provides water locally only. There's not enough infrastructure to get it passed into the main pipes because the pipe's too small. And so if you were to start adding more, you'd actually have to increase your infrastructure, make bigger pipes on your distribution to get it past local. But I'm not positive about that. That's something I read somewhere, and I'd be interested to know if that was correct.
okay, I'll look to staff and it might help to,
Yeah, I don't know the specific question can be addressed right now. I can follow up, but I do know that, for example, if Dusty Road was developed, not the full complement of the possible liters per second could be actually distributed into Seashell because of the size of the main. So it'd be a main upgrade. It's roughly only half of the water could be distributed. So it does have an effect on the pipe sizes. It's not just development of the wells for distribution, so there's other improvements necessary.
right, yeah, and presumably when these professionals did their reporting, they weren't looking at pipe sizes. That wasn't part of their mandate, I assume there.
No, it was more
More about-
supply rather than
Yeah.
distribution,
Yeah,
yes.
okay, thanks.
Yes, that was what I understood and I'd heard in the past. So, to bring a well online, to get the province to allow us to use the water, drilling the well is not a big deal. And even building the infrastructure to hook to the distribution is, because you got to do RFQs, you got to select somebody, you got to build it. But even before that, the timing to even get an approval.
Are we getting to questions here? I'm giving you extra time for questions.
So I was hoping that staff could give us an opinion on how long it would take to actually bring Dusty Road online if we started now. I'd like their opinion because I believe they have experience enough to give us a ballpark figure.
Good question.
Perhaps I could just back up 1 minute before I answer that question. Is just
Sure.
I was the chief administrative officer here when this report did come forward in 2019, so I have reviewed it extensively, and now I'm in the chair of the interim director, or general manager, I should say, sorry, of infrastructure services. So nothing has changed really from a profession's opinion on
It's
Dusty
not because
Road.
he was demoted. I just want to make that clear to everybody.
But it just highlight how we got to where we are today. So the Dusty Road, I just quote one section out of the report because, as was pointed out, it's several hundred pages. So Dusty Road has the lowest score of the 3 wells despite having the highest calculated sustainable yield. The overall score is significantly impacted by its low source protection score, which has the highest weighting of all the criteria. This reflects the unconfined nature of the aquifer and its location next to the Lehigh Quarry, putting the aquifer at high risk from contamination, which could effectively render the wells unstable in the future. The risk from contamination is deemed too high to justify well development costs when there are other groundwater options to explore at this time. So the other groundwater explored at that time are Langdale and Church Road wells, and they have a confined aquifer setting, allowing for that protective cap. So that's why where we are today, where we did follow up on the report. The recommendation was to abandon looking at Dusty Road further and put all our resources, staff, money, consultants, looking at Langdale and Church Road. So, Gord, to the original question about the timing, if I can just give an example of Church Road, these are the processes and approvals needed to bring a well to production and be safe for providing it to the public. So this is from a, you know, again, a licensing perspective examples, but it would apply to Dusty Road as well. In the case of Church Road, we needed a Town of Gibson's roadway use permit. We needed a Federal Department of Fisheries and Oceans authorization. We needed a BC Environmental Assessment Office concurrence. We had the water license issuance that has to be done by Forest, Lands, and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development. We need Vancouver Coastal Health authorization. We needed a BC Hydro Power Pole construction permit. We needed a SCRD geotech permit, an SCRD building permit, an SCRD Board of Variance development permit. There's 4 different MODI permits required. There was the Squamish Nation Archaeological Permit Authorization, a BC Archaeological Permit Authorization, a BC Heritage Conservation Act issuance, an SCRD development permit issuance, and a DFO, Department of Fisheries Ocean, hydrometric station installation needs to be approved. And then there's testing and commissioning. So it's a long process. As you can see, we've been working on it basically since 2019 when you look back at Church Road, for example. But even if it was expedited, to answer the original question, I don't think it could be done, you know, within this calendar year, certainly. Even if all these approvals I just cited were expedited and we could get studies done, contractors in line, engineers recruited, it's a significant timeline to get a water well in production to be safe for human consumption.
Thank you. And I did give Director Lee 3 questions, and I think the third one was summer water plans. So that's, I think that's important to hear prior to continuing this discussion. I see. Thank you. And thank the directors for their patience, and as they have their hands up online there.
And again, I'm hopeful that we'll have something in more concrete in the weeks ahead for formal reports, but understand that we're endeavoring to get Church Road online for this summer. Langdale, I'll have to get an update on that for you.
Director McMahon.
Thank you. Yes, summer water. That's what we need to talk about, and I really would like us to get a report sooner rather than later. I know that staff always like to have every last number pinned down before they report, but the community wants the big picture. Most people don't care about the decimal places. They want to hear what our strategy is going forward. And I think one of the strategies we absolutely have to look at is how we bring extra water sources online, because traditionally we have not been, say, going to Gibson's for water until we are already in dire straits. And if we are a lot more proactive, every liter of water we can get from Church Road and perhaps from the town of Gibson's is another liter we don't have to take out of Chapman Lake and is there to see us through the summer. So I'm hoping that this staff report will also lay out what happened in 2022 and then show us how we would handle it differently this year and how much water we could, or how much storage, how many days of water do we have? I think that's something that most people can relate to. I get lost in the millions of liters, but I know what a day is. So I'm hoping that staff will be able to provide something like that for us.
Thanks, Director McMahon. I'm looking at CAO McKinley.
Yeah, I can answer it very generally. In addition to what GM Brown was saying, we're hoping within the next couple of weeks, or the next very few weeks, we're going to have a fairly comprehensive report that looks at what we can expect in the summer of 2023 if the summer is the same as 2021 and 2022, or what's different this year. Well, Church Road coming online and providing a significant amount of water will be a major difference. Ongoing discussions with the town of Gibson's for how much water we might be able to get if we need it as an emergency measure from Gibson's is a benefit to us that might be in excess of what we were able to do last year. Some of the discussions around reduction in EFN, they do need to occur. It is a tool that could be valuable. What's interesting is it's a more valuable tool, or it's an easier tool to wield earlier than later. We tend to look at it late, and we tend to look at it late when the water levels are already quite low and the fish are trying to come up the stream, and it's when there's the least water available to consider reducing it. So EFN reduction should almost be considered earlier as instead of later, and that's something we could look at. We've got Grey Creek as a supplemental source that we're looking at, and we are looking at options to move forward. And what are our options to expedite Langdale to the extent that we could? And what amount of risk management might be involved in doing something like that? We would be happy to look at all of those things. And we would hope, I would hope that the report that we bring forward in the coming weeks will examine those. And then the other thing that's changing, I suppose, as we look forward to 2023, although I don't know that this will have a tremendous amount of impacts in 2023, is the collaborative water summits where the elected leaders from all the local governments are getting together to talk about short, medium, and long-term solutions will hopefully lead to support moving forward for specific projects that have specific advocacy plans that can be backstopped by our local elected leaders, allowing us to hopefully minimize timelines to at least some manageable extent and to maximize opportunities to get grant funding to support identified projects.
I'll just provide some personal input right now too, that I think in those water summits, I think people are ready for some of those brass tacks next time. I mean, I heard the comment up here that we had opportunity to bring those up before, but it's mostly been pretty general relationship building right now and talking about values, and which is important. But you know, I think Water Summit 3, I'm hoping we can get to actual. I think there's an appetite from everybody in the community to start talking about those actual proposals, as the CAO has suggested here. Director Paul.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have one question and one kind of comment too. The question is, what is the viability of using like the tractor trailer size portable water treatment plants for these sources in the interim, like when it comes down to stage 4 and heading into stage 5 kind of thing? And my comment would be, and I think a lot of you have heard me say this before, is we need to start rethinking our conservation methods and stuff. Like, we keep talking about increasing our supply, and the land has a certain amount, and every time we start taking even more and more increased amounts out of it, it's gonna have an impact on it. And I think I've said before too that it seems incredibly crazy that we use treated water to water our gardens, wash our driveways, wash the side of our house. We need to do, part of the stuff needs to be an increase on conservation, rain collection and stuff, whatever, to be able to use that recycling things. Like, one prime example, I think, is the car wash in Seashell. It was going to be shut down before in water restrictions, and I think they've gone to contained water, so they recycle their own water to be able to provide a service still. That kind of thinking is what we need to encourage more with these kind of things, because there's a lot of stuff for, I've seen the comments for stuff like breweries and everything else, like not a needed substance. I mean, that's not needed for life, but I'm sure it helps with some people's lives, but we need to start rethinking that. And I think it is our job as leadership to start doing that and start doing the community consultation, start advocating to BC and federal governments to increase funding for rain capture and recycling, gray water systems and stuff like that, to ease the burden, to help people transition to that. But we need to start thinking that way more. If saying like getting into stage 3 or 4 is unacceptable, it's not true. We use so much water to flush toilets. We're using drinking water to flush toilets. That's insane. I've met many people from different countries, I'm sure everybody else has, that they think that's insane. Like, we use drinking water to flush toilets. So we need to start rethinking that, and everybody's small part of it will help on that. So thank you.
Thanks, Director Paul. I'd like to reframe that as a bit of a question too to staff, in that particularly with the conservation, a lot of efforts and went into determining leaks this past summer, and it just seemed like all hands were on deck, making sure we'd address some of these huge leaks that we'd known about for years and years. And I think Director Paul raises, I mean, to me, some of what he raises is the need to be more proactive about that, and rather than, you know, when there's suddenly a water emergency, I mean, we need to take responsibility for this as a board, saying now we're going to go after the big leaks. Now we're going to send letters to all the big users, and are we continuing that work throughout the year after what happened last summer to make sure that we're not in that situation again, at least from the conservation point?
Thank you for the question, Chair. Yes, indeed we are. We're following up on the high users, and they will be getting letters. We have worked with Bio Enforcement Office, and as well as our officers, our own water staff are working hand in hand with Bio Enforcement, and we'll be resuming the ticketing for people that sprinkle outside of the hours and days during the different stages, to make sure that there's compliance with our watering restrictions. We have also worked with the province through KPMG, which were on hand when I was here during the state of local emergency in the EOC. They are exploring with us these various sources that Director Paul referred to, other sources that we can use on an emergency basis to see if we can have those ready ahead of time, ahead of an emergency. So those are being actively looked at through funding from the province through KPMG. So that's very welcome. Is there any other questions that I didn't answer?
No, I think that.
I do have a follow-up on the EFN if I could at this point.
Wait, sorry.
Just on that, if I may, Chair, what about the work on the leaks in our water mains, the acoustic testing? How much of that has been done in the last 12 months?
Again, because I'm new here for a week, I'll have to follow up on a more detailed answer on that. But I know it's being actively looked at as far as leaks within our own system, as well as on private properties, which was done last year. So the assumption is it's still being done, but I'll confirm that for you. I do have a follow-up on the EFN as well, because again, when I was in the Emergency Operations Center, we had a number of EFN requests, reduction requests. We have a request into the province right now for a more general annual EFN reduction, but it does require nation approval. It does require Department of Fisheries and Oceans approval. I'm not optimistic that's going to be forthcoming. The governing bodies are, rightly so, worried about the fish habitat and are reluctant to give blanket approvals for EFN reduction. During the emergency, I had to apply weekly and have weekly biologist reports on the state of the creek and that we were asking for the EFN reductions on. So the fish habitat is number one, and those have to be looked at with each EFN request. Having said that, if it was a reasonable request and the fish habitat could be protected, those EFN reductions were forthcoming. So they can be used when it's safe for the fish habitat.
Thank you. Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple things I wanted to comment on, and then I've got a question here, probably for our CAO. The fact of the matter is that as we add more people to our community, we're actually seeing our total water consumption going down. People get it. Fixtures are more efficient. There are less leaks. In the past, our shortages have been related to overconsumption and wastage, but we're seeing more and more of a shift to shortages relating to climate change and a collapsing ecosystem. You know, when we look at things like the siphons in Chapman Lake, it was a cheap option that was provided to provide emergency source of water to mitigate the need for much more expensive upgrades in terms of deepening the channel, which the province turned down. And that's something that, you know, if we didn't have those siphon systems in place, Chapman Creek would have been dry last summer. We'd have been in the newspaper just like Campbell River was. So emergency programs and resiliency demands that we diversify our sources. I think we all get that. I think our community gets that. I've been really patient with the Church Road project and the issues that have come along with such a massive project. I've been defending it in the community on a regular basis, but at this point, my understanding is that the construction work is finished. We're simply waiting on the final license to use the water from it. Prince Rupert just received $65 million to upgrade its distribution system for 14,000 people. I would expect the issuance of a final permit should be a much cheaper win for the province. And I'm wondering if this is an opportunity for advocacy with the ministry responsible, and if there's, you know, beyond the advocacy work that we as a board perhaps should be doing, should we be encouraging our residents to, you know, start a letter writing campaign to the province? Because our part in this project is complete. We're waiting for the province at this point. So, advocacy question for staff.
CEO?
Yeah, thank you for the question through the chair. I would say that there is going to be an opportunity for advocacy potentially for Church Road as we look to get of the myriad permits and licensing requirements we've gone through with the various agencies, and GM Brown had listed a number of them as examples. I believe, and I always know just enough to be dangerous sometimes, but I believe there is some very low flow testing the province is still waiting for the results of prior to issuing the equivalent of a final permission to operate the well at full production. We would want to time the advocacy with ideally with the completion of the testing, so that if we're advocating, they can't say, well, we're actually waiting for those numbers from that low flow test. So I don't know what the exact status of that is. That will be included for sure with the detailed report that's forthcoming. What we don't want to have happen is to be ready to turn it on completely and not have the piece of paper when we enter stage 2.
Director Stamford.
Yes, I just want to follow up on some items that Director Paul mentioned. The importance of a regional approach, and all the municipalities and the regional district working together. We're in a situation, for instance, last summer where I was getting calls from somebody who was losing their orchard because of lack of water, and 2 blocks down, there was somebody else watering their driveway to keep the dust down. This is a communication issue. I don't think we're there yet with our community, is that even though you may have your own well, even though you may not be on the same system as another person experiencing stage 4, we all work together. It impacts the whole region, not just whoever's water system you're on. And that what I do as a neighborhood is, if the regional district is on stage 4, then we look at our own wells at stage 4 as well. We take the same measures, even though we're not under the same requirements, to make sure that everyone is conserving water at the same rate, because it all impacts. They may be separate aquifers, but they are all related in some way. And we as a community are all related. So even though you can wash your driveway, it really, really doesn't help anybody by doing it. So I think we need to do more with our communication, building up to that, so that we don't have these terrible perceived inequities in water usage in the summer.
Director McMahon.
Following up on the perceived inequities, one of the pain points over the last few years has been the fact that we don't and can't really regulate indoor water use. So the people with the outdoor water use get hit. And the breweries, for instance, don't. And I guess my question to go to staff for maybe the upcoming report is, are there any regulatory tools that we haven't explored that we might be able to use to help make it a little more equitable in terms of water use? And particularly given the situation with agriculture. You know, we need the water for agriculture. Ideally, we wouldn't be using treated drinking water for agriculture, but it's the situation that we're in right now. And anyway, I put that over to staff. If there are regulatory tools we haven't looked at, if other jurisdictions have had approaches that we haven't tried, then you know, let's get all the tools we possibly can. Thank you.
We'll look to staff.
Yes, thank you for the question. The regulatory tool that we have basically is our water bylaw. So whatever tools we have in there, we're putting to use as far as enforcement and looking at the water usage for the various uses and land uses within the SRD. There's going to be a report coming forward on farm uses for the very reason that Director McMahon just pointed out. But I would point out that one of the, and it's been mentioned here, is it's not just looking at the supply side of things, but the demand side, and to totally regulate indoor use. It's the water meters. That's going to be the solution. It's getting all the water meters in. We have a number in, and that's helping us not in terms of direct consumption, because it's not being billed that way, but it will be, as having inclining block rates, so that the more you use, the more you pay per cubic meter. So those are the tools that I'm familiar with and other local governments are used. Is by and large it's the water meters that look at the demand side of things, and it has the big impact for water usage. And so I think that would be the most significant thing that could come forward, and we are working on that, obviously. So that will be, unfortunately, not for this summer, but in subsequent summers, those will be in place and will help significantly in water demand.
We can confirm that in Gibson's, and I'll repeat my previous position that I really hope those water rates are in next year's budget. I know there's work being done on that, but and even if not everyone has meters, I think the SCRD needs to implement those rates for the areas that do. Looking to Director Bax now.
Yeah, I just want to circle back to what Director Paul was mentioning earlier. I want some answers from staff about, I'm sorry, what's the name of the well that's down the road from Dusty Road? Grey Creek. The Grey Creek well. So am I to understand that Grey Creek has a water license to supply water, but it has turbidity issues? Surface water. It's a surface water? Mm-hmm. It's a creek surface water, okay. And it can only supply local, and it doesn't, and we don't use it very often. And what would it take to put in a temporary or a small filter that would make this water available more often and more clean, that we could put it into our system?
Again, thank you for the question. It was one of the items that was being looked at by KPMG consultants, and I can update the board on the status on that, as CAO has said in the forthcoming report. But it is being looked at it as a more permanent solution, if feasible, to put treatment for that location.
Thank you for the answer, and I want to thank staff for, I know you're doing a lot of hard work, and I know this is the lifeblood of our community. Without the water, we're going to be in big trouble, and I just want to recognize.
Director Gabias.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Director Henderson, for starting this conversation. I think it's really important that we keep having those regularly. I agree with Director Paul. That really resonated with me. I think, You know, like ultimately for this summer, the cheapest, most effective way to kind of ease this water crisis is conservation. And we know what it looks like now. There's been 2 summers. We kind of know what to expect. Like I personally, we installed a rainwater catchment system for my garden because I want to be ready if stage 4 happens. So conservation is going to be a huge and kind of a mind shift from this. We've been so lucky, we've been so blessed to have so much water for so long, and now our climate is changing, our watersheds are changing, and we need to recognize that and adapt to our changing climate. So on that note, question to staff, I guess, is have we ever explored making rainwater catchment systems or gray water systems mandatory for every new development or build that happens on Sunshine Coast? I understand it's a provincial jurisdiction, but how could we maybe push for that?
I believe we have. I'll look to the CIO to elaborate.
Yeah, I'd be a little out of my depth to a degree. I know that it's an area we've looked at, and some of the questions that we'd need to wrestle with are, if we were to go down that road, how prescriptive would we make something like that? Would it be, you must do these things within these development permit areas, let's say? Or would we look at it a different way and say the goal within these development permit areas, and that would be the tool, by the way, is the establishment of development permit areas. The goal within this development permit area is to achieve A, B, and C. There are a number of ways you might be able to do that. Please tell us how you plan to achieve those things. That would be a less prescriptive, more flexible model within a development permit area that might achieve the same goal. I don't know that it's something that we're doing right now, but it's definitely something that we're thinking about.
Director Toth.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up on that a little bit, because the District of Seashelt, in the previous council, we did pass a motion to ask our building department to approach the province to look at a local, I'll get the term wrong, but it's a local variance to the BC Building Code. And there's going to be studies and reporting and things that have to be worked through as part of that process. But it is something that we're starting to look at, requiring gray water systems in new builds. And when that initial round of information comes back from the province, the conversation at the time was that we would then look for sort of a joint application. So it'd be the whole Sunshine Coast. And there will be costs associated with the municipality and the regional district if everybody else jumps on, in terms of what the province needs for information and regulations to know that it's safe and workable. But at least in Seashelt, we are already talking about mandating gray water recycling as a system. Thank you.
Okay. Director Henderson.
Thank you, Chair. I guess just to wrap up, perhaps, for now. I started this today by saying I was looking for solutions, and I acknowledge a couple of them have been forthcoming solutions for this summer. But much of this conversation, it always seems to be that we end up, because that's such a challenge to come up with a short-term solution, that we default to talking about things that can't possibly be done this year, and I suggest even next year. So I challenge the board again, please, in the next week or two, what are the other solutions? Conservation? Sure. Water meters? From everything it's impossible to have them this year. I can't see us getting them next year. I don't know how long that's going to be, but hopefully we'll find that out soon. The big one for me, though, is, the reference to the dangers of whether it's dusty road or moving quick with anything. Yeah, I quite agree there's some risk. But what is the danger of us not having water? What is the danger of us having a forest fire and not having water? What is the danger to structures if we have a fire? And biggest one, as I've referenced in my letter, which incidentally I sent to everybody on February 5th privately. This was not meant to be a public document. It was to drive, hopefully, conversation internally and have staff produce a report. But the big thing for me is if we run out of water or we have any kind of catastrophic situation, our insurance rates will go up astronomically and then never come down. That, to me, is the bigger danger than of concern that we can test for in terms of water quality. Despite what's been said here at the table, we can test every day if we need to. So we can test, and I could go on and on and on, but you know, there are wells that we are drawing water from that have septic fields within 100 feet, for example. There's all kinds of things that are happening. And so the appearance that a Dusty Road well is going to be a bad thing is factually and hydrogeologically is not correct. So I encourage staff, I hope for our meeting in 2 weeks that we can have some fulsome report on the things that have been discussed. And again, I'd end with a challenge. What other solutions do you have for September of 2022? Thank you.
Thank you for wrapping that up, Director Henderson. Can we do that? Or, okay. Thank you for wrapping that up. And I want to further thank you, Director Henderson, for putting this on the agenda. This was a really important discussion. It's the discussion that the community coast-wide is looking for us to have on a regular basis, and especially in public like this. And we will be continuing it in future meetings. We've heard with this report that's coming, and also the Water Summit. The next item on our agenda is not in camera. Right, it says in camera here, but that's been shifted. So it's the adjournment of the meeting. Is there a motion to adjourn? Seconded. All those in favor? The meeting's adjourned. The mic? It's just that there's an audience online too, so that's why.
Thank you. I just want to say I appreciate the opportunity to come and sit in on this meeting, but if I could just suggest moving forward that when there are reports that it would be interesting to all of us to know something about, it might be better to hold this kind of a meeting after we actually have the reports. Is that understood?
We're considering water all the time, and there's reports all the time. So
right.
we're,
just,
you know, there's going to be there'll be reports, and there'll be more reports,
good.
and there have been reports in the past as well. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you.
CAO McKinley.
Yeah, just for clarification, are you referring to the reports that we were talking about today? Because I think those were published.
No, she's talking about the report that's coming in a week or two, and
gotcha.
I'm just saying, reports are a continuum. So I mean, there are, yeah, there'll always be. Bob, come on up.
Thank you. I do believe that the EFN being looked at could be a savior. And yes, it's restriction on the fish, but that should be coming in May, whenever the water starts flowing, so you can save water through May, June, July, when there's a lack of fish attention. Now, I don't know what you guys are doing about it, but that water will be saved behind a dam for September. The other one is I did a search on wells the other day for a client, and I identified a well right at the bottom of Chapman Creek by the Ministry of Environment. It was put in 2021, and I'm kind of wondering, it's a 50-foot well. The water is 9 feet down, and it's being monitored. What is it there for? It's not a bad idea is to look at that spot where it's basically creek water and the fish are done with it. It's not in the ocean, to put a well in there and tap it right into the system. And I know that's a future thought, but what is that well monitoring? Is it monitoring the flow, quality of the water? Does anybody know?
Is this new information for staff? Are you familiar with what Mr. Mitchell's bringing up? Or I'm just wondering if I'm not trying to, maybe this information should be shared in writing, and then our staff can look into it further. Okay, Director Toth knows more about this.
Well, 499.
I think the well you're talking about is a Ministry of Environment monitoring well that the board actually gave, no, excuse me, that one was a District of Seashell property.
It's a District of Seashell property.
Yeah, so it's installed in the park. The province did a series of monitoring wells all around the same time, and the previous board did approve some down in Whispering Firs, I believe. But yeah, it is just a Ministry of Environment water quality monitoring well, so.
But yeah, it's just, I just looked at it and said, okay, it's not a bad idea. It's below the fish bearing, a well there that, you know, you have to worry about the salt water in that area, of course. Wouldn't be a bad idea if that would work, but it's just, I found it surprising that it was there. Okay, thank you.
And sorry, I haven't been asking people to identify yourselves, but could you, just because our online audience in particular would it would help.
My name is Roger Walker. Len, Director Lee may recognize me. I want to thank the board for the opportunity to attend this meeting, and it's been very informative and very helpful. My one comment that I want to make is an ex-government employee, well aware of the complexities and frustrations of overlapping jurisdictions, but I just can't help but say that I'm absolutely appalled by the fact that we allow the extraction of a non-renewable resource to threaten a virtually unlimited aquifer in our watersheds. Thank you.
Thanks for that input. Anyone else? Yeah, one more.
Jeff White from Seashell. I'm just following up on my wife's comment there. Through the last hour or so, there's been a lot of questions from all of you about all related water issues. Staff didn't have the answers. Staff are coming back to us in the next 2 or 3 weeks. And I don't think that's really serves the purpose. I think we need to have your questions, which have been, these questions have been out there for God knows how long, and staff can't really answer them to any satisfactory degree. I'm glad that finally the water meter issue came up, because water meters were, the AEP was almost 2 years ago, 7-point-something million was approved. The process to get that approved, it was touted that about 30% of water loss would be saved. And if that's the case, they should be installed by now, and I don't know why it's taken so long. I don't know whether staff can answer if there has been a contractor chosen to install the water meters, how long it's going to install, how long it's going to take to install 4,000 meters around the community. Likely not going to be done, as I think they already said, this summer, maybe next summer. That's a big job, 4,000 meters to be installed. So we're not really relying on those, but it was a big solution to part of the problem 2 years ago. To Kate Louise Stanford, you talked about having even people's private wells controlled by various regulations, I believe, earlier on. Did you not? No? Somebody was saying, anyway, that people on private wells should be under the same regulations. Well, I heard that sitting back there.
Through the chair, can I just respond? What I meant was culturally and as a neighborly response, a paradigm shift, I hate that term, that people understand that we're all in this together, and that even though we're not required to conserve our water if we're on a private well, that as a community, we work together and we all conserve. That was my point. So I
Morally,
hope-
you're suggesting morally
yes.
then.
So I hope that wasn't
So morally
misconstrued.
then, sorry, but okay, going back to my point then, about 7 or 8 years ago, my wife and I, sick and tired of the lack of water for our gardens and our shrubs, all which are very expensive, we had our own well drilled. It costed $20,000. It's immediately 300 meters downstream of the Dusty Road site. And the water was tested, and the volume was excellent, and the quality was excellent. So we used that on our gardens, and we paid for it independently because this was going back 7 or 8 years. The problem was not being solved by staff or directors, for that matter. So that's why people have wells, and some people pay for it. And it still hasn't been solved. So this year's going to be the same, and maybe next year. My comment. Thank you.
I think all directors would agree with me too, that it's our collective responsibility as elected officials. It's not to blame on staff. It's we set direction. Now you saw it today in that discussion, and a report will be forthcoming because we raised those questions. So it's our responsibility
I appreciate
on
that,
on the community's
we've been
behalf.
waiting for this for years and years and years.
And it's our responsibility. Yeah. I appreciate that. And I thought I saw the CAO there. Yeah, I mean, I will say that I expect that we'll be hearing more about the contract for the meters soon. Probably sooner than that next report even. And thank you for the questions. And we're already adjourned, so it's we've got a board meeting later this afternoon and a regional hospital board meeting before that.